Hi, Gabriel, Gideon, Jonathan, and Josephine. We got another story. This one is called The Bad Case of Stripes by David Shannon. Camellia Cream loved lima beans, but she never ate them. All of her friends hated lima beans, and she wanted to fit in. Camilla was always worried about what other people thought of her. Today she was fretting even more than usual. It was the first day of school, and she couldn't decide what to wear. There were so many people to impress. She tried on 42 outfits. That's a lot of clothes. I bet you don't even have that many clothes. But none seemed quite right. She put on a pretty red dress and looked in the mirror. Then she screamed. Her mother ran in the room and she screamed too. "Oh my heavens," she cried. "You're completely covered with stripes." This was certainly true. Camilla was striped from head to toe. She looked like a rainbow. Mrs. Cream felt Camilla's forehead. "Do you feel all right?" she asked. "I feel fine," Camilla answered. "But just look at me." Here, I think I can do this better. "Just look at me." "You get back to bed this instant," her mother ordered. "You're not going to school today." Camilla was relieved. She didn't want to miss the first day of school, but she was afraid what other kids would say, and she had no idea what to wear with those crazy stripes. That afternoon, Mr. Bumble came to examine Camilla. "Most extraordinary," he exclaimed. "I've never seen anything like it. Are you having any coughing, sneezing, runny nose, aches, pains, chills, hot flashes, dizziness, drowsiness, shortness of breath, or uncontrollable twitching?" "No," Camilla told him. "I feel fine." "Well then," Dr. Bumble said, turning to Mrs. Cream, "I don't see any reason why she shouldn't go to school tomorrow. Here's an ointment that should help clear up those stripes in a few days. If it doesn't, you know where to reach me." And off he went. The next day was a disaster. Everybody at I'm gonna have to open this. Everyone at school laughed at Camilla. They called her Camilla Crayon and Night of the Living Lollipop. She tried her best to act as if everything was normal, but when the class said the Pledge of Allegiance, her stripes turned red, white, and blue, and she broke out into stars like the flag. The other kids thought this was great. One yelled out, "Let's see some purple polka dots." And sure enough, Camilla turned all purple polka dotty. Someone else shouted, "Checkerboard!" And a pattern of squares covered her skin. Soon everyone was calling out different shapes and colors, and poor Camilla was changing faster than you can change channels on the TV. That night, Mr. Harms, the school principal, called. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cream," he said, "but I'm going to have to ask you to keep Camilla home from school. She's just too much of a distraction. And I've been getting calls from the other parents. They're afraid those stripes might be contagious." Camilla was so embarrassed. She couldn't believe that 2 days ago everyone liked her, but now no one wanted to be in the same room with her. Her father tried to make her feel better. "Is there anything I can get you, sweetheart?" he asked. "No, thank you," sighed Camilla. What she really wanted was a nice plate of lima beans. but she had been laughed at enough in one day. Well, yes, I see, Mr. Bumble mumbled when Mr. Cream phoned the next day. I think I better bring in the specialists and we'll be right over. About an hour later, Dr. Bumble arrived with 4 people in long white coats. He introduced them to the Creams. This is Dr. Goop, Dr. Sponge, Dr. Cricket, and Dr. Young. Then the specialists went to work on Camellia. They squeezed and jabbed and tapped and tested. It was very uncomfortable. Well, it's not the mumps, concluded Dr. Goop. Or the measles, said Dr. Sponge. Definitely not chickenpox, put in Dr. Cricket. Or sunburn, said Dr. Young. Try these, said the specialist. They each handed her a bottle filled with different colored pills. Take one of each before bed, said Dr. Goop. And then they filed out the front door, followed by Dr. Bumble. That night, Camellia took her medicine. It was awful. When she woke up the next morning, she did feel different. But when she got dressed, her clothes didn't fit right. She looked in the mirror, and there, staring back at her, was a giant multicolored pill with her face on it. Dr. Bumble rushed over as soon as Mrs. Cream called, but this time instead of specialists, he brought the experts. Dr. Gourd and Dr. Mellon were the finest scientific minds in the land. Once again, Camellia was poked and prodded, looked at and listened to. The expert wrote down lots of numbers. Then they huddled together and whispered. Dr. Gourd finally spoke. It might be a virus, he announced with authority. Suddenly, fuzzy little virus balls appeared all over Camellia. These are viruses. Yeah, those little guys. And so, yeah, or possibly some sort of bacteria, said Mr. Mellon. And out popped squiggly little bacteria tails. Those are bacteria tails. Yeah, pretty cool looking stuff, huh? Let's see. Or it could be a fungus, said Dr. Goad. And instantly Camille was covered with different colored fungus blotches. Let's see, what are the fungus blotches? I don't see them. They're supposed to be just different colors. Maybe those. The experts looked at Camellia and then at each other. We need to go over these numbers again back at the lab, said Dr. Gourd explained. We'll call you when we know something. But the experts didn't have a clue, much less a cure. I think they were pretty scared of it. By now, the TV news had found out about Camellia. Reporters from every channel were outside her house telling the story of the bizarre case of the incredibly changing kid. Soon a huge crowd was camped out on the front lawn. Look at Camellia. Oh my. The Creams were swamped with all kinds of remedies from psychologists, allergists, herbalists, nutritionists, psychics, and an old medicine man, a guru, and even a veterinarian. Each so-called cure only added to poor Camelia's strange appearance until it was hard to even recognize her. She sprouted roots and berries and crystals and feathers and a long furry tail, but nothing happened. One day, a woman who called herself An environmental therapist claimed she could cure Camilla. Close your eyes, she said. Breathe deeply and become one with your room. I wish you hadn't said that, Camellia said, groaned, because slowly she started to melt into the walls of her room. Her bed became her mouth, and her nose was a dresser, and 2 paintings were her eyes. The therapist screamed and ran from the house. What are we going to do? Cried Mrs. Cream. It just keeps getting worse and worse, and she began to sob. At that moment, Mr. Cream heard a quiet little knock on the front door. He opened it, and there stood an old woman who was just as plump and sweet as a strawberry. Excuse me, she said brightly, but I think I can help. She went into Camilla's room and looked around. My goodness, she said with a shake of her head. What we have here is the bad case of the stripes. One of the worst I've ever seen. She pulled out a container with some small green beans from her bag. Here, she said, this might do the trick. Are those magic beans? Asked Mrs. Cream. Oh no, replied the kind old woman. There's no such thing. These are just plain old lima beans. I bet you like some, wouldn't you? She asked Camellia. Camellia wanted a big heaping plateful of lima beans more than just about anything, but she was still afraid to admit it. Yuck, she said. No one likes lima beans, especially me. Oh dear, the old woman said sadly. I guess I was wrong about you. She put the beans back in her bag and started towards the door. Camellia watched the old woman walk away. Those beans would taste so good. And being laughed at for eating them was nothing compared to what she was going through. She finally couldn't stand it. Wait, she cried. The truth is, I really love lima beans. I thought so, the old woman said with a smile. She took the handful of beans and popped them into Camelia's mouth, right there. And looky there. Suddenly, the branches, the feathers, the squiggly tails began to disappear. Then the whole room swirled about, and when it stopped, there stood Camellia. And everything was back to normal. I'm cured, she shouted. Yes, said the old woman. I knew the real you was in there somewhere. She patted Camellia on the head. Then she went outside and vanished into the crowd. Afterwards, Camellia wasn't quite the same. Some of the kids at school said she was weird, but she didn't care a bit. She ate all the lima beans she wanted, and she never had even a touch of the stripes again. I love you, boys and girl. Bye.